Good morning, ladies from the Southport Mothers Group. My name is Arizona and I am here today with my colleague Lauren. We are here from the Gold Coast Domestic and Family Violence Association, and we are going to talk to you about an issue that we hope you never have to endure in your lifetime: the growing issue of family and domestic violence. But the reality is that many of you in this room, or someone you know, will be a victim to some form of violence throughout your lifetime. A survey of domestic violence data in Australia revealed that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men have experienced at least one incident of violence from a current or former partner since the age of 15. Between 2014 and 2016, there were over 264,000 domestic violence incidents reported and recorded.
Tara Brown, Karina Locke, Teresa Bradford and Luke Batty. These people have all been victims of domestic violence.
While this information might not be applicable to you personally, chances are someone you know will be in a domestic violence situation at some point in their lives. I will be speaking to you about domestic violence in terms of intimate partners, the warning signs to look for, and the steps to take to separate yourself from an abuser. I will then hand over to Lauren, and she will talk to you all about family violence in regards to children. Domestic and family violence is violence or other abuse by one person against another in a domestic setting, such as a marriage or in a de facto arrangement. It may be termed intimate partner violence when committed by a spouse or partner in an intimate relationship, and can take place in heterosexual and same-sex relationships, or even between former spouses. Domestic violence can also involve children, parents, and the elderly. It can take many forms, and a lot of women are not even aware that they are being abused by their partner because it's not physical. Mental, emotional, verbal, economic, religious, reproductive, and even sexual abuse are all forms of domestic violence, and can range from subtle forms of coercion to noticeable abuse. There is a lot of legislation in Australia around domestic and family violence, as well as outlining the types of violence and the definitions. There are different acts depending on the jurisdiction or state you live in, and the Queensland Act is called the Domestic and Family Violence Protection Act 2012. This is a good place to start if you aren't entirely sure if domestic violence is occurring in your home, and it can give you an insight into what steps you might want to take to ensure your safety. In abusive relationships, there may be a cycle of abuse during which tensions rise and an act of violence is committed, followed by a period of reconciliation and calm. As a result, victims may experience physical disabilities, dysregulated aggression, chronic health problems, mental illness, limited finances, and poor ability to create healthy relationships. Domestic violence is also a growing problem in the LGBTQI community. A 2013 study showed that 40.4% of self-identified lesbians and 56.9% of bisexual women have reported being victims of partner violence. In 2014, national surveys indicated that anywhere from 25 to 50% of gay and bisexual males have experienced violence from a partner. Domestic violence in its many forms is becoming such a concern to society, and many wonder why a person would stay in the relationship if they are being abused. There are so many reasons why an abused would stay with an abuser. They can be threatened into staying, where their partner tells them that if they leave or if they tell anyone the truth, they will be hurt or killed, or they will never see their children again and their safety might be threatened. They could be fed lies by their abuser that if they leave, no one will support them, financially or romantically. They will never be able to do better and will never find somebody who loves them. Some women believe that staying together as a family is what's most beneficial for their children, in order to keep them happy and not upset them by changing their life going through a divorce. DV is among the most underreported crimes worldwide for both men and women. A 2011 review article by intimate partner violence researcher Ko-Ling Chan found men tended to underreport their own perpetration of domestic violence, while women were more likely to underreport their victimization and overestimate their own violence perpetration. Financial or familial dependence, normalization of violence, and self-blaming were found to reduce the likelihood of self-reporting victimization by women. By contrast, fear and avoidance of legal consequences, the tendency to blame their partner, and a narrative focus on their own needs and emotions reduce the likelihood of self-reporting perpetration in men.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren. So Arizona has just covered what domestic violence is and the warning signs to look out for. I will be explaining how children are taken into account by the law where domestic violence is present and what the courts can do to protect domestic violence victims and their families. For anything regarding family law in Australia, your first port of call should be the Family Law Act and the Domestic and Family Violence Protection Act in Queensland, which I will be referring to today. These acts themselves are hard enough for lawyers to come to grips with, but hopefully today we can help you all navigate them should you ever have to consider them. Domestic violence has a knock-on effect which impacts many around the perpetrator and victim of the abuse. Domestic violence has more of an impact on children than many might think. Children who live in homes where there is domestic violence grow up in an environment that is unpredictable, filled with tension and anxiety, and dominated by fear. This can lead to significant emotional and psychological trauma, similar to that experienced by children who are victims of child abuse. A report undertaken by the Queensland Domestic Violence Task Force stated that 90% of children present in violent homes had witnessed the violence perpetrated against their mothers. In research undertaken by the Australian Institute of Criminology, 15% of young people surveyed had experienced domestic violence and 32% of young people knew someone who had experienced it. Children witnessing the violence inflicted on their mothers often evidence behavioural, somatic or emotional problems similar to those experienced by physically abused children. Family violence is considered in Section 60D of the Family Law Act. The purpose of this section is to outline the court's main objective in children's matters, which is the best interests of children are the paramount consideration of the courts. So you can rest assured that the courts will always consider the best interests of children, and within this, domestic violence will be taken into account by courts. Under Australian family law, children who experience domestic violence firsthand through abuse and those who witness domestic violence in the home are both taken into consideration by the courts in family law matters. Section 9 of the Domestic and Family Violence Protection Act outlines that as well as the aggrieved, a child of the aggrieved, a child who lives with the aggrieved, a relative of the aggrieved, or an associate of the aggrieved are also considered. This means that any impact on people surrounding the aggrieved, including their children, is given weight by the courts. The Australian Family Law Act has taken this into account in Section 4AB and is similarly recognised in the Domestic Violence and Protection Act under Section 10. They both recognise that a child is exposed to family violence if the child sees or hears family violence or otherwise experiences the effects. All of these instances of exposure to family violence are considered by courts and have an impact on parenting proceedings. Children are impacted greatly by domestic violence, and you can be assured that courts appreciate this impact and have ensured children and their experiences of DV are considered.
If you or someone you know finds themselves in a situation where they are being domestically abused, one of the first and safest things to do is to file for a protection order against the abuser. This may be difficult, as they might still be living with them or want to continue to live with them for the sake of the safety of their family. However, this is in fact the safest option when beginning to separate from a violent partner for both yourself and your family. A domestic violence order, also known as a DVO, It is made by a magistrate in court and can protect you and others by making a person committing violence against you be of good behaviour and not commit the violence. You can also ask for conditions to be added to the order, such as making it illegal for the violent person, which is the respondent, to come within a certain distance of where you, as the aggrieved, might live. You can ask the police to apply for a DVO. Otherwise, you can apply directly to the court yourself. You can elicit the help of a lawyer, a community or welfare worker, a friend or a family member can also apply for you. A domestic violence order can stop someone from approaching you at your home or your work, staying in a home currently or previously shared, even if the house is owned or rented in their name, approaching your relatives or your friends if they are named in the order, and going to a child's school or daycare centre can be prohibited as well. If financially you feel tied to your abuser, certain banks can give loans and provide support and housing for victims of domestic violence. Even reaching out to friends or family is a very positive step, as then you have more people looking out for you and are aware of your situation. It is understandably incredibly difficult to make that first reach out for help or to do something to separate yourself from an abuser, but it is undeniably the most positive thing you can do for both your safety and your mental well-being.
The process of courts can be extremely difficult for domestic violence victims and those around them, and can result in re-traumatisation due to having to relive the abuse over again. There are a number of protections that can be arranged in court proceedings to protect you and those you know if you are a victim of domestic violence. To protect you in court, they may allow you to appear via video or audio link. Further, children are not required to be called as witnesses unless an order is made to the contrary. You may be allowed to change to a safer location. You may have a barrier put up between the aggrieved and the perpetrator. A support person may be allowed. Staggered attendance may be arranged. Security personnel may be present. And further, children may be appointed with independent children's lawyers to represent them and their best interests. We hope that today has been enlightening and empowering and given you a deeper insight into domestic violence and how it affects victims and their families. We hope that you can take away some valuable information and tools to help you understand the impact of domestic violence on families and what practical considerations can be made by victims and the courts. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have put the images of these 4 people up to help you appreciate the significance of domestic violence and the impact it can have. All 4 of these people, Tara Brown, Karina Locke, Teresa Bradford and Luke Batty, have lost their lives as a result of domestic violence.
These people highlight the different circumstances and familial relationships where domestic violence can tear apart the lives.
It is so important that people are educated and understand the tragic circumstances that result from domestic violence and how tragically it can change so many people's lives. Thank you.